that God walks with us on this journey of discernment and this journey of trying to figure out where God is leading us and calling us, even in times of uncertainty and fear, like not knowing who the next leader of the Synod is that time God walks with us. But my name is Pastor Josh Copeland. I am the pastor of Our Saviour Lutheran Church in Christiansburg on the southwest part of the state, and I serve on the Bishop Election Committee. A little bit about me. This is not the first Bishop Election Committee I have served on. I served on twice in North Carolina on the Bishop Election Committee as a layperson. This is my first call, so brand new to the pastor scene, but have served on several bishop election committees going back when I was a kid. I was the token kid that they always asked to do things. And here I am, the token kid, getting asked to do this as well. So here we go. So a little bit about tonight's workshop. So of course, we are going to talk about the Virginia Synod bishop election and the process that it takes. But we're also going to take some time to sit and pray with each other, and as well as talk about how the Spirit moves, not just in the Virginia Synod, but also in our own personal lives. So we're going to talk about personal discernment as well as community discernment, which we're all getting ready to do. So the list of folks serving on the Bishop Election Committee, we kind of chose people from around the Synod, tried to get people in all the different areas of our Synod, and unfortunately we missed Richmond somehow in this list of folks, but pretty much everywhere. So Ali Beck serves in Fredericksburg. I serve here in Christiansburg. Liz Leonard's in Roanoke. Dave Ray, I can't ever pronounce his name. Reiki is in Warrenton, Virginia. And Pastor Adam Schultz is in Lexington. And then Deacon LaBelva Stevens in Wytheville. And Pastor Leslie Weber serves as the chair of our committee. So those are the people that comprise it. And we will be the persons kind of talking about the process and how we move forward in this process and how we kind of make it work for the Virginia Synod. So we're the people that are kind of coming up and working with that. But wanted to kind of talk about discernment and what is discernment, what's the beauty and the power behind it. And so I have this video on the spiritual gift of discernment.
Hey, I'm Pastor Daniel Humbert, and I want to talk to you a little bit about the spiritual gift of discernment. Discernment is this powerful ability to be able to discern right from wrong, good from bad, to distinguish truth from fiction, to maybe better understand what it means to know what is spiritually real and authentic versus something that may be kind of not accurate or not actual. And so the spiritual gift of discernment is a powerful gift in the life of the church. You know, in scriptures in the early church, in the book of Acts, we see a couple of different accounts where people in the life of the church were discerning the spirits of God and trying to discern what a powerful way forward might look like. One is in Acts chapter 5 with Ananias and Sapphira, where they kind of don't do real well, but the church discerns that they haven't done well and helps lead the church forward. And then in the Great Jerusalem Council in Acts chapter 15, the church is trying to determine how can we reach new people, and they discern a way forward by kind of weighing out the options and determining how they can move forward the best. Discernment helps the church make really good and appropriate decisions. But it also helps individuals, helps them make life choices, helps them to make vocational choices, helps them to determine where they might go or what they might do. And so the spiritual gift of discernment can be used in the life of the church, whether in leadership roles or maybe even in teaching roles, but it can also be used for individuals to help them better understand what their future looks like or how they can relate to people in appropriate ways.
So spiritual discernment is a gift that we all possess and that we all need to be open to. We all discern in different ways. Some of us discern the call to be a pastor in this room, in this Zoom room. Some of us discern the call to be a president of a council. Some of us discerned to just be a part of a church. We all use discernment in our daily lives. And with all discernment, it all is rooted in prayer and in relationship with God. And so this prayer is by Thomas Merton. And I would invite you to say it with me and stay muted. So repeat after. So we'll pray this prayer together. Oh Lord God, I have no idea where I am going. I do not see the road ahead of me. I cannot know for certain where it will end, nor do I really know myself. And the fact that I think I am following your will does not mean that I actually am doing so. But I believe that the desire to please you does in fact please you. And I hope that I have the desire in all that I am doing. I hope that I will never do anything apart from that desire. I know that if I do this, you will lead me by the right road, though I may know nothing about it. Therefore will I trust you always. Though I may seem lost and in the shadow of death, I will not fear, for you are ever with me, and you will never leave me to face my perils alone. And that prayer really does hold true, that God walks with us on this journey of discernment and this journey of trying to figure out where God is leading us and calling us, even in times of uncertainty and fear, like not knowing who the next leader of the Synod is that time. God walks with us always. A reading from 1 Corinthians. Now there are varieties of gifts, but the same Spirit. And there are varieties of services, but the same Lord. And there are varieties of activities, but it is the same God who activates all of them in everyone. To each is given the manifestation of the Spirit for the common good. To one is given through the Spirit the utterance of wisdom, and to another the utterance of knowledge according to the same Spirit. To another faith by the same Spirit. To another gifts of healing by the one Spirit. To another the working of powerful deeds. To another prophecy. To another the discernment of spirits. To another various kinds of tongues. To another the interpretation of tongues. All these are activated by one and the same Spirit, who allots to each individually just as the Spirit chooses. For just as the body is one and has many members, and all the members of the body, though many, are one body, so it is with Christ. For in the one Spirit we were all baptized into one body, Jews or Greeks, slaves or free, and we were all made to drink of one Spirit. This scripture is really all about discernment and the gifts that God has given to us and how we discern those gifts. But it's all given to us by our God. So I'd like to have some kind of conversation around this topic. Share an experience when you experimented with your spiritual gift, or how did you find your spiritual gift, and what was that like? So maybe a better way to rephrase this question. Do you all have a spiritual gift? You all have kind of gifts and ideas and gifts for ministry. How did you discover those? And what was it like discovering them?
I'll send things off in a weird direction.
Okay.
I will suggest that my greatest gift is an inability to sing. I can't carry a tune in a bucket. But when I was a freshman at Muhlenberg, during orientation, there were a few dozen of us who became friends. And on Sunday morning, the number of those who attended chapel was, as you might guess, somewhat fewer. And all the people who could sing were all in the choir, which left me sitting in the pews with only one other person. The end of the story is I still sit with her some 50 years later. So I consider that my spiritual gift is this inability to sing, which I eventually recognized was the Spirit's way of leading me to the right life partner who has enriched my life tremendously for the last 50 so years.
Yeah, thank you for sharing.
I would say that, of course, discerning to go into the ministry, but when you ask what it was terrifying, because I had these thoughts, I had these feelings, all of that mixed up in discernment, and I knew what I felt, and I knew what I thought was right or appropriate and all that. I didn't know if anybody else would think it too. So to get a certain validation of the fact that the track that I was on was faithful was very meaningful. But each time something new came up, it was frightening again.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I'd like to piggyback on that, actually. And also the Thomas Merton prayer, which I liked because it emphasized the fear and uncertainty so often. I like almost every clause of that prayer. My discernment call was kind of upside down too. I thought I had a gift of teaching, and I do, but I thought that meant teaching in a professional capacity, like having the title teacher. What I found is, as often with the call, it's not necessarily what we think it is, and it often means leaving something behind. So I had to leave behind what I thought was my call to be a teacher and discover that God had an entirely different way for me to go about teaching God's people. And I think it's the more rewarding route, but it's not without, it's not without its uncertainties and its fears and the realization that we don't know exactly how God is going to work it out for us, but we trust. And if we trust, it works out right.
Yeah. I think that's the key, right? The trust part of it. And I think if you talk to anybody about discernment, there's usually that time of unknown, the fear, which is why I love that Thomas Merton prayer too, but to also trust that God is leading us. And that's personally, that's communally, that's everything in discernment, is that trust in the Lord and the Spirit's presence in our lives. Does anybody else have anything they want to share on that question before we move on to our next question? Okay. So as it is when we all have individual gifts, but we're all called to be part of a team and part of a community. When have you felt that you were part of a team where all the parts worked together for the common good, and describe what that felt like to be part of that team?
I like this question because that question was really fulfilled for me when I was at Gloria Day. I worked with a senior pastor. Basically, he took care of the church and I took care of the school, which was really neat. To be working with the children every day and to, like number one, I didn't see myself as a quote unquote children's or youth minister, but that's what I readily became at Gloria Day. And it was wonderful to work on a team. I love team ministry, and it worked out good because he worked within his strengths and I worked within my strengths.
Yeah, so we're all a part of a team, and we all work together for their strengths. And whether or not we have anything that we wanted to share with us, I'm sure we've all been part of something like that, where each individual's spiritual gifts and the discernment of those gifts work together. And you really had to kind of use discernment to figure out how to use those gifts in a team setting. So that's all part of it as well. Our next question, do you see the connection between how God has gifted you and how you can influence the world? So how do your gifts, how do you see the connection between how your gifts and how God uses you? And what is it, and what ways are you using your gifts for the world? We don't have to share those around. I understand that we're recording this, but something to consider. And just to ponder as we move into this time of discernment as a community. And then the last question before we move on is, what are you noticing that gets in the way of the Spirit? What gets in the way of the Spirit and your discernment? That I would like to share.
I got that one. Ego, wanting to be liked, money, reputation. There's so many things that get in the way of actual discernment, and it's very difficult, but you got to push that all aside, and it takes practice.
Continual practice.
I
Yeah,
can add to that and say that fear
Yeah.
of not knowing what to do and how to do it, and then not doing it.
absolutely. That's
I think
that's a big
yourself gets in the way because you begin to doubt yourself that you're not good enough. You know, don't have the experience or whatever. But I think sometimes we get in our own way. God helping us to discern what He wants us to do.
Absolutely. Thank you. And that really does pull that question together, doesn't it? Does anybody have anything else they want to add to what's already been shared? So
Yes.
Go ahead, Bill.
It's interesting how quickly we could all jump on that one compared to the others.
Right? Isn't that the case?
Yes, yes.
Because I could have given Paul's exact list, and I suspect half the people or more would have jumped. You're spot on, Paul.
I guess I just listening, which I do most of the time. The pastors could probably, Paul could probably attest to that. And I think that what gets in my way, other than just trying to listen and learn everything, is how to really explain it in a way that not only I can understand, but who I'm speaking to is able to understand. I'm always looking and getting tidbits of stuff, but never the full picture. Never the full picture.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Hi, Pastor Wes.
There's just no underestimating. I know this sounds like a downer, not meant to be, but how difficult the call of God really is. That the call always requires some kind of sacrifice. As I said before, it's always rewarding because, we are serving God, and that is its own reward. But it's never just a simple or easy thing. And I think that's why discernment is always required, because it takes a kind of spirit vision or look to help us see beyond the obstacles that we outlined a couple moments ago.
Yeah. And that kind of gets to our next part of this. So with discernment, as we noted, it's so easy to look at the negative, right? It's so easy to look at what we're not good at, what's not going to happen, what's not going to do. So easy to look at the negative. It's harder to look at what we are called to do, and because we let ourselves get in the way. And I think it really all boils down to we let ourselves get in the way. Fear. All of those kind of things, mostly fear, because as Paul said, it's terrifying, the call of God, and it's not easy to do. Want to kind of move into now, we're going to pause on the discernment talks and move into, continued discernment talks, but how does the discernment work at the Synod Assembly for the Virginia Synod? And so we'll talk about, and I'll make that presentation and walk you through it, and how it's going to look like for us. For you pastors who have been, and lay people who have been through this before, this is nothing new to you. In that sense, it is what is called an ecclesiastical ballot. We will still do an ecclesiastical ballot to let the Spirit blow, but there are some intricacies that we are implementing this time to have that conversation of discernment. And so before the Synod Assembly, what we're asking folks to do, pastors from any synod, they can be on any synod. They just have to be rostered within the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America. We're asking people who have discerned, taken that time, that they're open to leaving their name in. If you're not open to leaving your name in, you don't have to do this. Don't worry about it. But if you're open to leaving your name in, to submitting a bio and headshot, and the bio form is just going to be name, congregation, and a few short answer questions. That's it. nothing more than that. So it's a informal pre-identification process. This is something new this year. This is something new that we're trying. We have seen this on church-wide level. The reason we decided to do this is because a lot of lay people have no idea who to vote for come time. So it allows some people to take some time to pray over the names of people who have said that they'd be willing to stay in. For pastors, we know that this can create some heartburn in the congregations that you may serve. We know that this is a time, if you say you're going to leave your name and, oh my God, the pastor's leaving, we know that that's going to create some heartburn. It's going to create heartburn on the day of, pretty much. That's just how it works. This is that discernment process, and this is the negative versus the positive that we're looking at. So if you could be having if you decide you want to leave your name in, to have those conversations with your congregation, to know that you're not looking to leave necessarily, but you're open to the call and will of the Holy Spirit, to have those spirit-led conversations. So that's what we're asking before. We will put those out 2 weeks ahead of time, I believe is what we're talking about, and remove them. We're going to remove them so that you can't see them right before the first ballot. So they won't be on there before the first ballot, is how we're going to do it. So the first ballot is what is called the nominating ballot. So voting members can vote for any pastor on the ELCA, not just those that were pre-identified in the process that we're doing. And that's any roster, active and retired, both can be nominated for this. In order to be elected on the first ballot, 75% of the legal votes cast are necessary for election. In other words, 75% of it, you have to have 75% of the vote in order to win. If no one is elected, the first ballot is considered the nominating ballot, and it moves on to the second. Does that make sense to folks? Any questions on the pre-identification part and the first Yes, Laura.
I'm a layperson and I haven't been through this process before. So you said 2 weeks ahead of time, there's going to be some names or bios sent out. But then
Correct.
when we actually get to the assembly, those names will not be on the ballot. If
They will
we've
be
read them ahead of time and there's someone we like, that's who we vote for at that first ballot?
correct.
Okay, thank you.
They will be, so the intricacies of how we do that have not yet been ironed out. That's one of the things we're still working on, is how do we distribute that. But if you are a voting member at Assembly, you will be getting emails and stuff about all of that before Assembly, so you can prepare for that. You'll get all of the bulletin reports and stuff like that that come with Assembly, and those will be included in that. But then they will be removed from the website and other things right before the first ballot, so that does that make sense? Yes, Reverie.
This may be a very simple question, but are there any actual requirements for somebody other than being on a roster? Are there any requirements for being a bishop? Can you be a bishop, for example, if you've never been a congregational pastor? Do you need to be a certain amount of experience? Are there any actual requirements?
There are no requirements in that instance, as long as they're rostered on so a campus minister, if somebody's served as a campus minister their entire ministry, they could be elected bishop. But it's pretty much just anybody who's on the rostered, active or retired. It can be, and on any synod. So for example, in North Carolina, the current Bishop Tim Smith was elected out of the Southeastern Synod because he was serving as pastor of Redeemer Lutheran Church in Atlanta when he was elected Bishop of North Carolina. So that's something that can happen as on this way. So the second ballot is after. So once the first ballot has completed, people who made it onto that ballot have a certain period of time to decide whether they want to remain on that ballot. So say I get nominated to be bishop. I'm running over to the table as soon as possible to remove my name from the ballot to be bishop. Because I am not discerning the call to be bishop. So that would be my time. So there's a set time frame that one can go over to the table, and that will be clearly identified during the Synod assembly where that table is, to sign a paper to remove your name from the ballot. Those that don't remove their name move on to the second ballot, and that includes all of those eligible candidates who leave their names in. Again, like the first ballot, 75% of the votes cast on the second ballot are required for election. Any questions on that?
Joshua, is it true that once your name is on there, you cannot take it off?
Correct. If you go into the second ballot, you cannot remove your name after the second ballot. It is going into the, so from the first, you have time between the first to the second. But if your name remains on the second ballot, you're in it for the long haul. Paul.
What about if someone is nominated and they're not there and they don't know that they've been nominated and they cannot remove their name?
So that's part of the bishop election committee. So we contact everybody who's nominated. If they're not there, so like, for example, when Bishop Smith was elected out of Redeemer, he was called because he certainly wasn't at the assembly when he was nominated. So he was called to say, do you wish to remain on the ballot? He said yes. If you don't, you're emailed the form, you can fill that out and send it back to us. So that we contact everybody who's nominated.
Well, that happened to Pastor Larson 6 years ago. Remember?
Yes. John, yeah, it did.
Yeah, they had to call him.
He was up with me in seminary. Any other questions on that? Okay. The third ballot is, once the second ballot has happened, it narrows down to the top 7 candidates. So it goes from however many were on that second ballot, the top 7 move forward onto the third ballot if nobody is elected on the second one. At that time, we will provide a prompt and with questions ahead of the assembly. So the Bishop Election Committee, we're going to get, our next meeting is to actually set the topic and the questions for these speeches, what we want people to kind of answer and talk about in this time. So they're given, I'm not sure the time period yet either, that's also being ironed out, but you will hear, the assembly will hear from the top 7 candidates plus ties. Say there's a tie for second place, it's the top 7 plus ties move on to this ballot, and that will be, and then you'll hear from the speeches from the top 7 candidates before the third ballot. The speeches happen before the third ballot. Speaking from experience, when you start to hear the speeches, the vote starts to move. You start to really see the spirit move when the speeches start happening. And then the third ballot is taken right after those speeches. So 66.6% of the legal votes are required for election on the third ballot. Any questions on the third ballot?
Josh, can I interrupt with just a general question here? I'm sorry if it's out of place.
Go ahead.
Does all of this take, what's the time frame on this? Does this occur over a couple of days?
Yes.
Or is it all focused into?
It occurs over a couple of days. So
All right, so by the time we get to a third ballot, we could be on the second day.
Absolutely, we're on the second day.
Okay.
Yeah, so thank you. I'm sorry I didn't explain that well. So this is spread out over the entirety of Synod Assembly. This is not a rushed all at once election. We give you certainly time to pray and consider over these candidates, and as you also hear from other things going on at the assembly. So things are constantly moving all the time. So the fourth ballot, before the fourth ballot, the top 3 have moved on from the third ballot. So after the third ballot, the top 3 are available for question and answer. And the Bishop Election Committee set those questions. We're actually going to be taking time during the conference meetings and stuff that you'll hear about in a few seconds to gather those questions from y'all and kind of what are we looking for in a bishop. So we'll have those time for questions and answers. And then the 4th ballot occurs, and that's 60% of the legal votes cast are necessary for election. If nobody's elected on that ballot, it moves to the 5th, and the top 2 move on to the 5th ballot. Any questions on the 4th ballot? Okay. The 5th ballot, there's nothing in between necessarily the 4th and the 5th ballot except time. No speeches or questions and answers. It's pretty much once you get to the top 2, it's a majority needed. So whoever receives the majority is then elected bishop of the Virginia Synod. Are there any questions on the way the structure works? The way the ballot, so it's always, it's 5 ballots maximum. It can be elected before the 5th ballot. It can be, you can have an election on any ballot. So that's how it kind of works. That's what's called an ecclesiastical ballot. That process that I just outlined for you is outlined within the Constitution of the ELCA. So that is the constitutionally outlined process. The only thing that we kind of have control over are the questions and the topics for speeches, as well as we decided to do the pre-identification process this time to try out and see how that goes as a discernment process for us. Are there any questions on the mechanics of the election?
Have other synods done this pre-identification, and how has it worked?
Other synods have. It's mostly the northern, Midwestern synods have done so. I also saw it in North Carolina at one point. So it does create heartburn. It's when you have somebody say that I'm willing to serve as bishop, or willing to keep my name on the ballot, congregations are going to get nervous because they're going to get nervous about losing their pastor. This is that heartburn. This is that getting in the way of the spirit kind of thing that we're talking about when we're talking about personal and communal discernment. So the synods that have been successful in this have been very forthright on what they're doing, so that pastors can then have conversations with their people about discernment in general, as well as discernment as a community for the good of the synod, so that we have better conversations and understand what it means to be church together, not just my own individual congregation. So those are the synods that have been successful. So that's what we're trying to do now, is be very forthright in what we're trying to do, and so that you all as pastors and lay people can have these conversations in your congregations. Any other questions on the
Is
mechanics?
this an opt-in or an opt-out? The pre-screening, is it opt-in or opt-out?
It's an opt-in. So not every pastor is going to have their names submitted in there. In fact, if it's going to create too much heartburn in your congregations, don't. You can still be on the first ballot. You don't have to submit your name. It's just for those that would like to be part of that pre-identification process. And it's just so that lay people and pastors who may be new to the synod can see who might be available to vote for on that first ballot, so that they're not voting for their own pastor to be on that first ballot. Does that make sense, Bill?
It does. I would have guessed that the opt-out direction would have created less heartburn. Because
we thought about that.
Go ahead.
We thought about that, the opt-out, but we decided against it, just because it's really hard to do so. To get it's easier for people to just submit it, because to opt out because we're asking people to fill out a paragraph as well about, you know, kind of their gifts for ministry and things like that. That's you really have to submit to us rather than opt out, if that makes sense.
Sure.
So that's why we went with the opt-in. We wanted this to also be a discernment process before Synod Assembly as well. So we just went over what Synod Assembly is going to look like. So we've already done some of this stuff. So gathering of the ministerium, at the gathering, we did have some discernment conversations with pastors. Then going forward, you should be hearing soon about conference and conference partnerships meetings, one for rostered ministers only to have these kind of discernment conversations, and another for lay voting members and rostered ministers to have these kind of discernment conversations about where is God calling the Virginia Synod. And congratulations, you're also a part of this discernment conversation happening right now at Power in the Spirit. So we're also gathering youth and young adults, campus ministries, Tapestry, Welka, etc., to have these kind of conversations as the whole of Virginia Synod. This is kind of where I get to have some more engagement from y'all. Oops. Okay, there we go. So you can see things have popped up quite a bit. So the bigger words are words that people have submitted multiple times. So leadership is a big one, and the shepherd of the synod. But also in there, I see healing, to be present, the pastor's pastor, to be a guide and mentor, a listener, to care for the pastors, faith-based leader, caring. So these are the qualities that you see in the role of the bishop, and those are certainly important qualities in the role of the bishop, but there is a whole lot more that goes into being a bishop, and we're going to talk about that role now in the next few seconds. But you can see leadership and the shepherd of the synod being a big one, and that certainly is one of the big ones. So what is a bishop constitutionally? So constitutionally, the bishop preaches, teaches, and administers the sacraments and kind of controls that throughout the synod. So the bishop is in charge of the word and sacrament ministry of the synod. So overseeing the pastors of the synod. So all of the things that go along with overseeing the pastors, good and bad, comes underneath the bishop. The bishop also ordains pastors and deacons, both. And attests to letters of call, meaning when we're attesting to letters of call, the bishop makes sure that a pastor is in line with compensation as well, kind of making sure the pastors are well compensated and in a good place. So the shepherd of the synod, that leadership role, that's all part of this as well. Bishop also installs rostered ministers, though in the Virginia Synod that gets kind of distributed to the conference deans. So you may or may not know that you have deans in each of your conferences. So here in the New River Valley, Bill King serves as our dean. I'm not sure who the deans are in and around the Virginia Synod, but find out who your dean is. It's always good to know who your dean is. Bishop also leads the synod's ministries, sets the vision. So Bishop Humphrey was instrumental in setting our Virginia Synod's mission of faithful, bold, and serving. That was part of his leadership in getting that started. Administer the work of the synod and provide spiritual support for the people of the synod. So yes, they're the pastor's pastor, but they're also pastor to the synod as well. So a lot goes into being bishop, and I'll invite you to Bishop Humphrey has reflections as well on what it means to be a bishop. So I would invite you to talk to him, and I can share with you, we have a 2-page document that he wrote up for us on his reflections as a bishop. So I'll make sure that everybody gets that as a part of this as well. So you can kind of see what Bishop Humphrey believes as the synod. But to have some final conversation together, what things would you like to see continue on the synod-wide level?
As a layperson, I love power in the Spirit.
Yeah.
I'd like to see that continue.
Good answer. Yeah. The youth programs, the winter sell, the lost and found, all of that.
As a member of the Tapestry team, I'd like to see continuing conversations on issues of diversity and inclusion.
Absolutely.
I think one of our main callings as Christians, let alone Lutheran Christians, is care for the alien and the orphan, everyone who is not, doesn't have what they need.
So kind of shifting gears and dreaming a little bit about exciting things, what would you like to see start on the synod-wide level? Sue?
I would like to see us share ideas and programs, the sorts of things that I know we've talked for years about. We're not sure what to call them, social ministry or missions or community support or those kinds of things. Where how, what kind of food programs do you have? What kinds of needs are you meeting in your community, and how do you go about that? How do you advertise that? How do you implement it? Just sharing those ideas, and so to see how much more we could do if we maybe got a little better organized.
Yeah. Reverie?
My family comes from the Southwest, and a lot of their congregations are involved in more direct support with immigration and immigrants. When I think about all the folks that are here from Ukraine and other places that they've run from, I'd like to see as a synod us take in more of those families and care for them.
Apparently I'm almost done. I didn't really realize what time it was. So last thing I'd like for you to consider, and just to wrap things up quickly in several seconds. What qualities in a bishop might aid us in following that calling? Of the things that we're thinking about of starting. So we don't need to talk about those, but to process that together. And then what candidates might embody such qualities? Those are the things that I'd like you to consider and to pray about as we consider the election of a new bishop. And to know that God is with us in our lives and in the synod, and our task now is to listen and prepare our hearts. May God be with us as we prepare to do just that.